Being empathic doesn't have to mean putting up with narcissistic abuse. When someone else is mistreating you, is your knee-jerk reaction to try to understand where they're coming from? And in conflict, do you find yourself thinking more about what someone else needs than what you need? Or does it seem like you're being cruel or heartless if you tell someone to stop or back off from acting in ways that are hurtful to you? Well, if you answered yes to any of these questions, then you may have a higher than average capacity for empathy. And if you had a narcissistic parent or a partner, this gift of empathy may have made or be making it harder to create distance from them. In order to create distance from a narcissistic abuser, the survivor must first be able to ask themselves, what should I have to put up with? And then feel free to answer this question honestly for themselves. Well, in today's video, I'm going to explain how this superpower personality trait of being empathic can sometimes get in the way of knowing what you will and will not put up with from others. Then I'm going to offer a strategy to empower you to selectively deploy your empathy so that you might feel free to extend empathy towards yourself and find it safe to decide that you will not put up with certain ways of being treated by others. Well, my name is Jay Reed, and I specialize in helping individuals recover from narcissistic abuse. We do this in individual therapy and through my online course and accompanying Facebook community. I offer a 3-step approach to recovery that involves making sense of what happened, gaining distance from the narcissistic abuser, and living in defiance of the narcissist's rules for living. Today's video is in the gaining distance from the narcissistic abuser category. So today's topic is actually an extension of Module 3 in my online course on recovering from narcissistic abuse. And in this self-study video and assignment-based course, I go into great depth on the 3 steps to recovery that I mentioned earlier. And then there's an accompanying private Facebook group so that you can experience community with others, support and validate each other in your process of recovery, and feel witnessed in what you've been through and in the progress you're making. So Module 3 in the course is called The Importance of Distance from the Narcissistic Family. I think that module, in addition to today's video, makes a powerful combination. So why having empathy doesn't mean you need to put up with narcissistic abuse. So possessing empathy is a gift, and I'll admit I have some bias given my profession, but I believe it allows one to feel strongly connected to the human experience in oneself and in others. It also helps you establish and maintain strong bonds with others. You know, people like to feel like their feelings matter to the people who are close to them. And if you possess a lot of empathy, then it's likely what the people close to you tend to experience with you. And when all things are equal, the birds of a feather seem to stick together rule means that you will be more likely to attract similar people. In essence, other people who are empathic too. So someone with a higher than average amount of empathy in their personality, who also grew up in a good enough family, likely expects to be treated the same way they treat others. I mean, after all, the golden rule of do unto others as you would have done unto you tends to work in these good enough families. But if you grew up in a narcissistically abusive family, then you may be used to being empathic towards others who don't pay it back in kind towards you. And there are a lot of good reasons for this. I mean, first, if we go back to the dilemma faced by the child of a narcissistic parent, if that child is also selected as the scapegoat to the narcissistically abusive parent, then he or she will be targeted and blamed for all the family's problems. So the child's found as the adversary by the very same people whom that child needs for his survival. So where that child expects and hopes to find that he is valued and loved for the unique person he is, he's instead reacted to as if who he is makes it impossible to love him. And where he hopes to see that the love he has to offer is cherished and valuable, he's reacted to as if he has nothing of value to offer anyone in the family. As cruelly as the scapegoated child is treated, he still has to find a way to attach to his narcissistic parent. And if the child in the scapegoated role possesses a high degree of empathy, then he might use this trait of empathy in order to do this. I think the task for the scapegoated child of the narcissistically abusive parents is like trying to walk up a sheet of ice with tennis shoes on. You know, there's so little traction offered to that child, and he or she's got to muster everything they have to not fall off the face of the ice. And an ice pick to gain traction in this case can actually be that child's sort of surplus of empathy. So consider this anonymized example. Again, it's a composite from impressions I've had in my clinical work, readings, and my own life and experience. We'll call this anonymous person Terry, who grew up in a narcissistically abusive family, and he described knowing from a very early age that his feelings really did not seem to matter to his narcissistic mother, nor his enabling father. And his mother would constantly find fault in him and blame him for anything that frustrated her in the slightest, while his father would either turn a blind eye or serve as her henchman to punish Terry further for what she was accusing him of. And in Terry's therapy later in his life, he grew able to understand how he had to stop expecting his parents to care about his feelings in order to make his life hurt less as a child. And one episode stood out in his therapy. He remembered at age 4 that he became obsessed with getting his parents to stop smoking cigarettes. He learned that at that age smoking can kill people and found meaning and purpose in doing everything he could to get them to quit. In fact, it was the only way he could act with indignation towards his parents. He could get upset that they were smoking and even chastise them for doing so. And in therapy, he was able to see how the only reason that was so was because he was doing this on his parents' behalf. That he was permitted to speak his mind, be listened to, and even respected if he was using his empathy on their behalf. And tragically, Terry could recall innumerable times where he was not afforded that same level of protective empathy. He recalled getting injured on the playground and his mother telling him to just stop crying, for example. And I think Terry's example illustrates how he was able to leverage his empathy to help him attach to the two parents who were so incapable and perhaps unwilling to attach to him. And to Terry's credit and to the credit of those who've adapted similarly, he was able to stave off the danger of having nobody by caring more about his parents' feelings than his own, just as they insisted he do. And it also highlights how he was able to endure incredible levels of emotional deprivation. And I say that because often the portrait of the highly empathic person is that they don't possess a certain level of toughness. And I think nothing could be further from the truth given what they've had to endure. And I also think it's important to highlight this in order to counter what can be a common survivor's idea that his or her empathy comes at the cost of either being tough or having grit or determination. So we might think of empathy for people in Terry's position with a narcissistically abusive parent as being like a faucet that has to always be on in order to survive. During the narcissistic abuse, if Terry or someone like him stopped being supremely empathic towards the narcissistic parent, then you or he may have risked complete rejection, something that would be felt as unsurvivable as a child. So the consequences for turning off the facet at that time in life would be very dire. So what gets lost for the empathic kid who survives the abuse in this manner? Well, he or she doesn't get to learn that she has a right to get angry or appropriately aggressive when others mistreat her. In essence, that they don't have to put up with mistreatment. Instead, the kid learns that they have to censor such reactions because those reactions could result in complete withdrawal from the very same people they need. In addition, the narcissistic parent may attack the child for any displays of anger towards that parent. And I believe that this is not to teach the child anything, but because it threatens the parent's ability to treat the child like the scapegoat. There's a great scene in the movie Boys in the Hood where the protagonist, played by Cuba Gooding Jr., is talking to his father, played by Lawrence Fishburne. And it's a flashback scene to Cuba's character as a kid where he recalls them fishing together, he and his father. And Lawrence Fishburne asks the young Cuba in the scene about the 3 rules of life that he's taught his son. And one of the ones that the young Cuba recites is, never respect anybody who doesn't respect you back. I remember how this struck a deep chord when I saw this as a kid because this was an impossible rule to live by in the home that I was in. A home that had the kind of dynamics I talk about on this channel. But I also think the scene is a beautiful capture of what kids should feel like they have a right to be empathic only to those who actually deserve it. So I think in recovery, the empathy faucet gets to be turned off and then turned back on only for those who deserve it. But the question can be how? Well, in recovering from narcissistic abuse by a parent or a partner, it can be really difficult to create distance from them when the empathy faucet feels like it always has to be on. It's really hard to evaluate the narcissistic parent or partner based on how they treat you because you're so used to your feelings not mattering to them and by extension not mattering to yourself. So here's an exercise that may be useful in recovering your own right to only show empathy or respect to those who do the same towards you. So I'd encourage you to think of someone in your life who you care about and towards whom you feel very protective of. Now imagine that this person had a parent who treated him or her the way your narcissistic parent or partner treated you. And then you can write down what you would tell this person so that they knew you thought they deserved protection from such treatment. Next, write down why you don't deserve the same protection as this person, and be as honest as you can. If you do come up with reasons, then shift to thinking of each of these reasons why you don't deserve protection as a hypothesis rather than a fact. And the next step would be to put your scientist cap on and ask yourself, okay, what's the evidence supporting this hypothesis and what's the evidence that doesn't support it? And then finally, you can ask yourself, okay, what's the most balanced conclusion based on the evidence? The purpose of this exercise is to help you generate information for yourself that gives you a right to be less empathic towards someone who doesn't treat you well. And I think this information may not feel true at the outset, but just because such information is unfamiliar doesn't mean it can't become more comfortable. And I think in narcissistic abuse, the information that's familiar for the survivor tends to be highly uncomfortable. Well, my hope is that practicing turning off the faucet of empathy towards a narcissistic abuser can be thought of as an act of self-care for yourself. Another resource for self-care is my free webinar that offers 7 self-care tools to help you recover from narcissistic abuse. And if you haven't already done so, I encourage you to click the link in the description box below or click here. I think you'll find that the webinar offers ways you can offer yourself daily tactics to care for yourself that can be essential in the process of recovery. Well, thanks for watching today's video and your continued engagement with the channel. I look forward to posting again next Sunday. Take care.